Hey, if you're thinking, I barely have time to write, let alone start a podcast, I got you. My Start Your Author podcast checklist helps busy writers like you start a podcast without sacrificing your writing time. No more guessing or Googling. Starting is actually the easiest part of podcasting. And with this step-by-step checklist, you can fit it in over the next 6 weeks or even next weekend. Stop letting uncertainty hold you back. Grab your free checklist at the link below and get on your way to serving your target readers today. Ever feel like you're drowning in the endless cycle of creating content when all you really want to do is hide out and write your book? Yep, I'm with you. Hey, I'm Kim, and I'm so thrilled you're here to learn how to reach and serve your readers as a podcast host and guest. So whether you're hosting a podcast today or you're wondering if you have time for that commitment, I can't wait for you to meet my guest, Mandy Pallock. Mandy hosts the seasonal podcast called Presently Engaged and is the author of The Question Habit, The Art of Building Resilient Relationships with God and Others, One Question at a Time. So Mandy and I connected through Podmatch, and I couldn't wait to ask her about her seasonal show, the different ways podcasting can help you as an author, plus tips for first-time authors like myself. Y'all, you're in for a treat today, so let's get to it. So, hey, Mandy, it's so great to meet you and welcome you to the Book Marketing Mania podcast.
Thank you. It's so great to be here.
This is so fun, both us Texas girls.
Absolutely.
So let's just jump into it, Mandy, and I would love for you to tell my listeners all about your book, The Question Habit, and who you wrote it for.
Absolutely. The Question Habit is all about building resilient relationships with God and others, one question at a time. So it's looking at what does it look like to have a curious faith? And so we can look at questions in scripture, what we can learn from them, and then how we can apply that to have non-awkward, mentoring, resilient conversations with people that we love, whether that's a spouse or a child or someone that we're mentoring. Really, what does it look like to be intentional in our conversations, and what difference can it make?
Okay, yeah, that's so fun. I mean, so many ways I could go with that. That's so fun. Just to focus on relationships, and just, what we're getting out of those and trying to help each other. And so many things there. So let's talk about podcasting specifically. I would love just to hear, you hosting your podcast, Presently Engaged. And then I know we've met through Podmatch. So I'd just love to hear you share about, starting your show, and has it helped you build your author platform or market your book once you're on the other side of having a book in hand?
Absolutely. So as far as the order goes of things, I started my podcast first, and I had been working on my book on and off, depending on the projects and commitment levels. And so I started my podcast first while I was working on my book. And then what I found is that having a podcast, having that discipline of publishing has been so helpful to me as a creative, as someone who wants to communicate, just to have that commitment and the discipline of that has been invaluable. And then on the marketing side of things, yes, here's a confession, Kim.
Yeah.
I love reading. I love audiobooks even. And so I'm not what I would call a rabid podcast consumer. And so I find it somewhat humorous that I'm in this podcast world now and I love it. And it's really because it's one of those, hey, what is an amazing tool? What's a good tool for this message for right now? And podcasting continues to be that.
Yeah. That's so good. And I think it's so funny because I consume a ton of podcasts and I go through my seasons of what kind of podcasts I want to listen to. But I've talked to so many people that, they've thought about starting one, but they think, oh, I don't really listen to podcasts. So I don't want to start a podcast, which I totally understand. But like you're saying, what if your target readers are listening, or it is a great medium just to reach them beyond, like if you write blog posts, like how can you reach them in that medium? But also think about, often I hear that from people that want to guest on podcasts. And so I'm like, but you're guesting, you're serving listeners. So they are out there, but I can see where, maybe you don't want to start one. And I know, there's always a time thing involved in it. So just, figuring out what way to go about it. So do you have guests on your podcast?
My podcast is scripted.
Okay.
And so I think that is one thing that's worth thinking about
Uh-huh.
is, so here's this communication method,
Uh-huh.
but what might be the most optimum way to communicate what you have specifically? Is it going to be through
Mhm.
guests and interviews, or is it going to be from a scripted podcast, or is it going to be something else that might be a little more fluid? And really taking the time to think through that is helpful. The other thing that I've done is start with what you have and then
Yeah.
grow from season to season. And so I just finished my 7th season of
Wow.
Presently Engaged, and it wasn't until season 7 that I transitioned from a audio only podcast to a video podcast.
Uh-huh.
And so it's been a fun adventure, but learning and giving yourself the grace to do things incrementally is really a great way to do it.
Yeah, yeah. And so when you say scripted, you're meaning like solo, like we talk about
Mhm,
solo versus
mhm.
guest on the
Yes.
show. Yeah. And I love it so much. Like I know oftentimes authors that are building their platform, that it's so much easier to just host a podcast and have guests on. It's so
Mhm.
much easier, like we're doing, talking to other
Yeah.
people. You feel like you're actually talking to somebody as well as serving your listeners. But I love that, when you focus on at least some solo episodes, then I'm
Mhm.
getting to know you as the author, right? And the
Right.
podcaster. And now that's so fun. I'm gonna have to go check out your YouTube channel.
Yes.
Are you doing it on YouTube, the video?
Yeah, it's on
Okay.
YouTube and Spotify as well. Because
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
now.
Because I know a lot of people are thinking about, is that the next
Mhm,
step? And like you said, you've got the audio under your belt and now you've branched into video, which is so
mhm.
cool. And so I want to ask you about seasons. Have you always done seasons on your show?
I have. The way I set it up was to do 10 episode seasons that
Uh
I would
huh.
batch record and then batch edit and then release once a week
Uh huh.
on a schedule and then take a break while I work on the next season.
Yeah. Oh,
Mhm.
I love that so much because I know, again, I get a lot of people that say, I don't have time to podcast, but they may
Mhm.
have time to do other things that they maybe shouldn't be doing that aren't as effective. But I love that because just like you said, like people think of seasons. Well, what is that? And you're
Mhm.
just like, it's 10 episodes,
Mhm.
and then you can just market the heck out of it. Right. And then,
Yes.
and be recording the next one. And
Mhm.
yeah, that's so, so good. I love that so much. Well, let's talk about podcast guesting because
Yes.
that's how we connected is
Mhm.
through the Podmatch platform. And I'd love to hear just what your experience has been with that, or even,
Mhm.
on your own guesting other ways, how podcast guesting has helped you.
Absolutely. I would say, as someone who's so privileged to be a guest on numerous podcasts, my favorite part about it is meeting amazing humans like you
Hmm.
and having a conversation, and the benefit that that gives me personally to think through questions and to try to be fresh in that way. And it's super valuable. And it's so easy because here I am in my library
Uh-huh.
and from my home, I can connect with you in your office and we can have a valuable conversation that serves people.
Hmm.
And so it's really taking the medium of today in a way that can be effective and potentially multiply that effectiveness.
Hmm. Yeah, that's so
Yeah.
true. I mean, it's so fun, yeah, to be able to connect with people when you're hanging out
Mhm.
at home and get to people across the
Yeah.
world. And I'm the same way as you. I've met so many people this way that I'm like, why have our paths not crossed before?
Yeah, I would say I think that it's an opportunity to really hone your message
Hmm.
and hone your why, because there are so many podcasts. You really want to verify that the ones you're spending time on are the ones that are an effective coupling of two visions,
Hmm.
and that's worthwhile. And so, Podmatch supports that because there's descriptions and you can see different episodes and back history and really seeing, hey, is this an effective podcast for the message that God has given me?
Yeah, yeah, that's so true. Have you done many interviews through Podmatch?
I have, yeah, and it's been fantastic and
Yeah.
easy to schedule and
Uh-huh.
and easy to kind of sift through and evaluate.
Yeah, I do. I love that how easy. I mean, that is the name of the game on that platform. Just how
Mhm.
easy it is and how it just works like magic in the background is how I feel like. When people say I don't have time to
Yeah.
pitch podcasts or I'm gonna have to hire somebody to do it, it's like, no, 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 just let Podmatch do that work for you. And you may still have
Mhm.
to do some other on your own, outside of the Podmatch world. But again, that's where I've just
Mhm.
been so blown away by how many matches there are that are perfect, and I wouldn't have found them any other
Mhm.
way other than Podmatch.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, yeah. From a marketing perspective, I
mhm.
think it extends the marketing life of a book because it continues to get your message in front of a new group of people, and that's a powerful thing.
Yeah, that's so true. And that is, yeah, one of the things I always hear from authors is like you launch it and there's this big to do. But then after that, it just dies down. And how do you ever get back that excitement? And I don't know that you always do, depending on what you are doing with your book, but you're going to keep sharing it, because you want to keep getting in front of new readers. And that is definitely something what I love about Podmatch, because it just sits out there, right? And it's so easy for hosts to pull it up. Like, I saw your book, I saw your picture, everything's there that I could possibly need to make a decision about a guest and invite them on the show. So yeah, it's so wonderful. Well, so tell us about your author journey, Mandy. And I'm asking selfishly too for myself, as authors thinking about getting their first book in hand, like say they have a first book coming out this year, what is the number one tip you would share with them for them to start thinking about? And it could be more than one.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There is so much that goes into writing a book, as you know, and as your listeners know. And I'm really grateful for some advice that I heard an author named Andrew Peterson share. And so he's the author of the Wing Feather Saga and God of the Garden, and he's a fantastic author. But anyway, someone asked him that same question. Hey, what advice do you have for an author who is writing their first book? And he said, it's just that you're writing your first book. There's going to be a second one, and it's going to be better. And that first book isn't going to have everything about the culmination of all of your life experiences. It's going to be that specific message right there. And that was really freeing for me as I was writing my first book. And now as I am writing my second book, just thinking that through, thinking, hey, this first book is a first book. And there's, Lord willing, going to be a second book, and Lord willing, going to be a third book. And really holding it with that perspective is very freeing, because sometimes as first-time authors or as first-time solo authors, we put this pressure on ourselves to have this be the moment. But if God's called us to communicate, that is going to be true in 2025 and 2027 and 2028 and, keep going on, and to really embrace that reality, this calling of it, not a one-time moment in history.
Yeah, that's such great advice, because you're right. I mean, I don't think I've met anybody that's ever wrote just one book and been done with it. There's always so many ideas swirling around.
Yes.
That's such great advice, and just to focus on that versus the big picture, or what am I going to do next? And, just knowing that this is my first book. So my heart needed to hear that for sure. Gosh. Well, this has been so good, Mandy. So tell everybody where they can connect with you, and if there's any other resources you want to share, I'd love to share them with the listeners.
Oh, for sure. For sure. My book, The Question Habit, can be found at thequestionhabit.com. It's you can get it in print or as an audiobook version. And then you can also jump off from that to connect with me on social or anything of that nature, and jump to my blog from there. So thequestionhabit.com is a great place to start.
Oh, I love that too. Just having the URL of your book title makes it so easy for listeners to remember. So thank you for that. Well, it was so great to meet you, Mandy, and I appreciate your time today serving my listeners.
Absolutely. Sounds good. Kim, I'm so grateful for your conversations and for the questions that you're asking, and for the fact that you're meeting a valid need, because it is a big world out there when you're thinking about, how am I going to communicate this message? And, how am I going to get it out there? And I love the encouragement that we get in 1 Thessalonians that says, faithful is he who called you, who also will do it. And sometimes we get hung up on needing to build a platform, or needing to fill in the blank, or get all these hurdles through. But really, God's called us to it, and he's going to be faithful. And so asking myself, what's the next right thing right now, really helps me in that.
Oh, I love that so much, Mandy. That's so true. Amen to that. Thank you so much. Oh, how fun it was to get to chat with Mandy. And if you're scratching your head wondering, what would I talk about on a podcast while I'm writing my book? Well, I want to share 4 questions from Mandy's book, The Question Habit, to inspire some ideas. So what particular burden has God given you? Maybe that's what you're writing about, or maybe that's what you need to be podcasting about to lead listeners towards your future book. How have you seen God work in your life this past year? Oh my goodness. I think everybody wants to hear that, right? We want to hear these stories of how God is working in your life. And maybe it's not even related to your book. Maybe it's a lesson that you've learned that you need to pass on. What needs in the world do you tend to notice first and you want to champion as a writer or a speaker on a podcast? Then lastly, what could you give a 40-minute presentation on with absolutely no preparation? Ooh, I think this is so good. So imagine turning the answers to those questions into magnetic content that attracts your readers while you sleep. That's what strategic podcasting could do for you, whether you're a host of a seasonal, monthly, or weekly podcast. Want to learn how? You could book a strategy session with me at the link provided here. It's a special listener rate, and learn to podcast in a way that works around your writing schedule, not against it. Thanks for tuning in to Book Marketing Mania. And as always, I'll be there for you to help you reach and serve your readers one podcast at a time. See you next episode.